noble effort in whatever way you can.
Good morning. Good morning. This reminds me so much of my law school classes where absolutely no one sits on the front row. We really need to figure out a way to eliminate the front row. I have one person who will ask all the questions, I'm sure. So I'm Ted Hagelin. I'm the director of the NYSTAR New York State Science and Technology Law Center at Syracuse University. I want to welcome you very much and thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to be here today. I want to thank our co-sponsors, NYSTAR and Ed Reinfert, who's back there, and as always, wonderfully helpful and supportive, and Bond Shenigan King, and I see Blaine Bettinger. I don't know whether, is George here yet? Okay, well, and thanks to Bond Shenigan King. So over the last 6 years, as we have served as the NYSTAR designated New York State Science and Technology Law Center, we put on a number of conferences, a few of them here at Welsh Allen Lodge, and I just can't imagine a more beautiful venue for a conference. This is a wonderful place to be, especially on a day like this. But of the conferences we've done over the last 6 years, I don't think any one of those conferences is more important than what we're undertaking today. We are all very much aware of the budget battles going on in Albany right now, and those choices are almost always cast in terms of cuts in spending or increases in taxes. And there is a third way, and that's to grow the New York State economy. And the key to growing the New York State economy is what we will be talking about today. The key to converting the $4 billion a year in academic research spent in New York State more productively into new products, new companies, and new jobs. The conference is organized around this wonderful report that issued in December from the task force, Governor's Task Force. It's a long name, so I'm going to refer to it as the Task Force Report on Building an Innovation Ecosystem in New York State. And I think that really is the takeaway line in terms of the Task Force Report. Many believe that this is the most comprehensive, most cogent blueprint for really turning around the New York State economy. At some point in the report, it is said that the future prosperity of New York State hinges on our ability to transform academic research into commercial products. And we have a wonderful group of speakers lined up to address this topic. We're going to begin with Daniel Doctori, who was the executive director on the task force and serves as the director of the Governor's Office of Higher Education. And Daniel's going to give us an overview of the task force findings and recommendations. Following Daniel, Ed Reinfert, who's also a member of the task force and the executive director of NYSTAR, will give us a sense of where the state is. And the key players, if you've looked at this report, and I hope you have, it's all about what universities should be doing, what industry should be doing, what the venture community should be doing, and what the state should be doing. And that's the way we've sort of organized this agenda. So Ed will talk about what the state is doing and plans to do to implement the task force recommendations. Following that, we have a break, and then President William Detzler will talk about what RIT is doing. And RIT is taking some truly bold initiatives in terms of partnerships with industry. And I think that's a model that we really want to take a look at around the state. After that, Robert Palazzo, who is the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Rensselaer, will talk about what they're doing at Rensselaer in terms of promoting entrepreneurship. And Rensselaer is mentioned in the task force report as a model for creating entrepreneurship on university campuses. We'll then break for lunch. Unfortunately, Assemblyman Magnarelli cannot be with us today. He was to be our luncheon speaker. He is caught up in a bunch of meetings in Albany. On what? I'll let you guess. And Beth Ruzzi's not here, but when Beth sent me an email on, I guess, Wednesday or Thursday, that there was a good chance that Bill Magnarelli might not be here, she said, "We better start thinking about Plan B, Ted." So I'm Plan B. So I will take over Bill's role at lunch. Following lunch, Julie Scheimer, who's also a member of the task force, and is President and CEO of Welsh Allen. We'll talk about industry's response to the recommendations of the task force report. And finally, Teresa Mazzullo, who's the CEO of Excel Partners, a seed fund in Rochester. We'll talk about what the venture community is trying to do. We will conclude with an open discussion. And so we have been here before on these beautiful Friday spring afternoons, and I know the tendency to drift out into the wonderful town of Skaneateles. And so we really want you to stay for the concluding open discussion. So in an unabashed way, to have you do that, we are raffling off an iPad. And there'll be a basket we will pass around. You put your business card in the basket. Molly has the basket back there. But here's the thing. You must be here to win the raffle. But it's a very, very, very nice iPad, and we really encourage you to stay. Daniel? Excuse me? Oh, only one per... Yeah, we're going to check that too. Right. No, yeah. Only one card per person, and we're going to check. So, I'm not going to, as we go through the introduction of speakers, you have their biographies in the brochure. I want to tell you one thing about the brochures. Spent a lot of time. Von Zell Jones was in charge of sort of putting this together. We have a printer and a design place in Buffalo. And so we always wait breathlessly for these brochures to arrive to make sure they're there. And Wednesday afternoon, the brochures arrived. And they come up from support services, and they bring it up to Molly, and it is an empty box. They loaded 150 of these brochures. You can imagine the weight. Somehow they turned it on its side. All the brochures fell out the side. They retaped the side that fell apart and brought up the empty box. So we said, you just have to rerun the brochures. We can't do that. You must do that, and you must get them to us by tomorrow. And they did. So that's the background of the brochures. But the brochures have all the biographies, so I'm not going to go through those. So I'm just going to simply introduce the speakers. And Daniel, you're up.
Good morning. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Ted. It's great to be here. Thanks also to Julie for hosting us and to NYSTAR for sponsoring this. I'm really, really so pleased that we could have an event like this focused on the task force. I'm just going to jump right into it and provide a little bit of an overview, why we did this, what the goals were, what were the key recommendations, and then a little bit about kind of what are the next steps. So I know that Ed's going to characterize some of the stuff that the state is doing, so I won't go into too much detail there. But just to give you, okay, so what am I pressing here? Not that. Okay, here we go. All right, got it. Okay, so why did we do this? This started in May of 2009, and at that time we were in the middle of the fiscal crisis. We were still feeling the effects, of course, of the fiscal crisis, and it precipitated some soul searching for the state. And we kind of recognized that for the past 20 years, New York State has really been dependent on Wall Street for its tax revenues. About 20% of New York State tax revenues have come from Wall Street. And this past year, the bottom fell out of that. So we thought, well, what else can we do? What kind of assets do we have that we can diversify away from Wall Street and kind of recognizing that even when Wall Street comes back, and it will, and the financial sector will come back, it may not come back in the same geographically dependent way. It may not be necessary for financial firms to be on Wall Street as much as it once was. So we need to kind of think about what else can we do. So we thought, one thing that we have in this state is colleges and universities. We have about 300 colleges and universities in New York State. And in particular, we have several major research institutions. And so we thought, what can we do to make those a more central part of our economy? How can we diversify away from Wall Street and kind of harness some of these assets that we have? So we kind of talked, what emerged was a kind of a two-part strategy here. Both, can we increase collaboration between our universities and our companies? And can we use our universities to promote more entrepreneurism throughout the state? And they're related, but they're separate. It's an important difference. One is with regard to established companies, getting those companies to take the next step based on the innovations that are coming out of our universities. The other side is, can we start new companies in New York State? And that hasn't really been the MO of New York State over the years. We've been known for the big companies that have national profiles and headquarters here in New York. But I think we're realizing in the state that it's time to, again, diversify away from our dependence on established companies and to say, well, can we grow our own? Can we start doing more to grow our own? So basically, we kind of identified these targets as what we're trying to do. We want to do more commercialization, we want to do more startups, but really what we're talking about is, can we make our higher education institutions the centerpiece of our economy in this state? And that's really what this report was all about, and that was what the work of the task force was. So in terms of who the task force is, this was our mantra throughout. The novelty is in the execution. There isn't too much new in this report. There have been a lot of reports out there, and Professor was very nice to characterize ours as complete or as robust, but in reality, there aren't so many new ideas here, and that's not what we're trying to do. In a way, we're trying to capture what the ideas that are out there, characterize them in a compelling way, and then distinguish ourselves from what we do afterwards. And just standing right here, I think, is a step in that right direction, and there's a few other initiatives that I'll highlight. So, but who is doing this? Basically, this game of the innovation economy is a function of a four-part puzzle. There's government, there's industry, there's universities, and there's investors. And we had all those sectors captured in our task force, and many of the people are here. Ed, Julie, President Jackson was on the task force, but really Bob Palazzo did a lot of the legwork, and he was really crucial to the process. So one of the advantages that government has is the ability to convene, and that was one of the great things about this. We really pulled together a great group, and in addition to our members, we had three what we called advisory committees, and these advisory committees included CEOs of small companies. We had a group said, who are you working with? How are you working with them? How do you make the decision of how to find a partner? What are the things that make a successful collaboration? What are the roadblocks that you're finding? Similarly, we talked to the tech transfer officers from the major universities, how they do their work, what are the hurdles that they see. And that was one of the most interesting things, the dynamic between the tech transfer officers and the kind of tech liaisons at the companies, and kind of, how those often meet at loggerheads, and what can we do about smoothing that process out. And finally, we met with a bunch of venture capitalists and kind of tried to unpack this mystery about why New York State, which is known as a financial capital, hasn't really attracted the venture capital that we might expect. And finally, we had really great input from many people in this room, but from around the state. We had 60 white papers. We had a couple of very well-attended hearings. And so in terms of the ability to gather information, this was, I think, government at its best. It was really playing that convener role that we expected to, and kind of getting information from a diverse set of stakeholders and people at a level that they're able to do something about the information that comes out. So in terms of what we found, this is kind of the basic story. It's a good news, bad news story, and I think more good news than bad news. Basically, we have the assets here. We haven't been able to make them work together as we should, or as we could. So in terms of the good news, we have arguably the best set of research assets in the country in this state. We have 20-plus research universities, 8 members of the AAU, that's same as California, 2 Ivy League universities. We're the only state with 2, and we have top-flight, just standalone labs, Cold Spring Harbor, Brookhaven National Laboratories, Trudeau Institute. We're doing well in terms of our sponsored research, $4 billion a year, second to California's $6.5 billion. We have R&D intensive industry here. Our top 5 patent holders are some of the most famous companies in the world. They're spending $11 billion a year annually, worldwide, on R&D. And it's interesting to note that because we generally think of our universities as the engine of innovation, but if you look at the numbers, you know, our top 5 patent holders are spending $11 billion, and all of our universities are spending $4 billion. So it's important to note that in terms of where the investments are and kind of how to respond. And then availability of capital. We have 60-plus venture capital firms here in the state. Most of them are in New York City, but not all. That's the good news. The bad news is, for one thing, our universities are not collaborating so well with industry. Only 4.5% of our research is sponsored by industry. You compare that to a place like North Carolina, where it's almost 14%. That's a big difference. In terms of our venture activity, you know, and a great report done by Teresa was, where's the investment going? What's happening in the venture community in this state? We're attracting about 4% of the national venture capital investment in the country. Now, we've heard recently that may be a little low, maybe it's more like 8%. I think the point is it's an order of magnitude less than in California. And so there's got to be something going on here, right? There's got to be something happening that can say, why do we have New York City that is the venture capital or the financial capital of the world, and venture capital is an industry where it's labor intensive and you want to be close to your investments, and yet we're not getting the bang for our buck. As a result of our anemic venture activity, we don't have startups. We don't have as many startups as California or Massachusetts. And then without the startups, you have less fast-growing companies. So that's kind of the bad news. Now, the reason I say it's more good news than bad news is because the stuff on the left side is much harder to create. You know, you can't all of a sudden say, we want to have world-class universities and then do it. We have that in the state. You can't say we want to have the biggest companies in the world headquartered in our state and then just bring them. So those are the expensive things. That's the hard work in a way. But now what we got to do is make it work better together. And I think that's a much more achievable goal, and I think that's one that we can all kind of buy into. And it's a lot more about sweat equity than it is about you know, dollar investments. So I thought that a kind of a good phrase that recently I heard from the Academy of Sciences was, an innovation ecosystem is a set of assets that are strategically linked through a robust network. We're doing real good on the strategic assets. We got to do better on the robust network. And that's kind of the challenge that we're facing today in New York. So this was the chart that we kind of used in our report. And I'm not going to go through the details on this, but I just want to highlight, it became very clear very quickly that what we were focused on is this yellow valley of death. And this is a national and international problem. This is not a New York State thing. The issue is, just to clarify, I'm sure most people here know what I'm talking about when I say the valley of death, but it's after you have a product that you know kind of works, or you know you have an idea that works in the laboratory, but between that moment where you have the aha and where you have a product that you can sell on the shelves, there's this space where it's very difficult to scale up. And this is a structural issue. Now, the question is, can New York State do something better than other states, than other countries, to bridge that valley of death? And what we learned through the research was that a lot of states are doing more than New York State is, in terms of the investments they make, in terms of the programs they have, in terms of the education they have. They're doing more. So we have to catch up in that area, and we got to do more ourselves. So that's, you know, if I'm going to characterize our challenge as the network, it's the network that we want to apply here in the Valley of Death and do something about that. So what are the key recommendations? Again, we kind of saw this as a three-part with the government as the kind of the box in which this all operates. But you need R&D intensive industry, research universities, and access to capital. We organized our report based on these key areas and said, here's what each of these things need to do, and we kind of identified a set of recommendations for each one. So let's start with universities. Above all, collaborators are looking for excellence. It became very clear to us when we went to talk to the CEOs that they're not interested in New York. You know, New York doesn't, you know, it's interesting to them. They have some kind of loyalty to New York, but really what they care about is, can we find the most excellent collaborator? And they're very nuanced in their approach to how to find those. So companies are very good at finding collaborators that are excellent. So above all, we need to just cultivate areas of excellence. Raise awareness through curricula awards competitions. The interesting thing that emerged from this was that there are very obvious leaders in the state in terms of collaboration with industry, and when I'm talking about universities, collaboration with industry and entrepreneurship promotion. And a lot of them are represented here. Stony Brook, RPI, Clarkson, RIT. You know, they're very kind of, they made themselves obvious very quickly to us. And the interesting thing was they weren't the big names. And when we kind of took a national perspective on this, it also became clear that a school can decide to be good at this stuff. A school can say, this is going to be a priority for us. We're going to find industry collaborators. We're going to promote entrepreneurship on our campuses, and then go out and do it. One of the interesting statistics we had was the ratio of startups to research dollars. Right? So you know, we know the colleges that get the highest number of research, federally sponsored research. But if you take the ratio of startups to that, the national leader is the University of Utah, right? And no one would think Utah is the king of startups in the United States, but in fact, Utah as a state and the University of Utah as an institution decided we're going to make this a priority, and then they went out and did it. And you know, it didn't take as long as you might think. Provide commercialization pipelines. One of the interesting things that emerged as well here is when we're talking about the innovation, the raw innovation, it's coming from professors who work in laboratories. In New York State, one of the things that kind of distinguishes us from California is those researchers traditionally don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs, and that's a big cultural difference. We had a guy on the task force named Santok Badesha, who is the head of CUNY's New Energy Institute, and we poached him from California, from University of Santa Barbara, and he would tell stories throughout the whole process of, hey, when I was out there, you know, we tried to get some money from the department chair, and he said, listen, I don't have money for you, but if you go down the street, you know, I'll help you make the pitch to the venture companies. I'll help you make the pitch to the industry. And that was just that was the mode of doing business, that it was a much more, the professors thought of themselves as entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs kind of were part of the professoriate community. So that's an important change, and one of the things that we said the universities can do is, in a way, train their faculty and train their students in how better to take an entrepreneurial attitude through their work, and how better to, once they have an idea, get it out into the world. And finally, incentives. One of the things is, you know, can professors leave, go be a CTO in a company for a year or two, and then come back and not have that hurt their tenure consideration? You know, it's small things like that that set the tone for a university. One of the things that emerged as a really major issue throughout was this issue of was licensing revenue on new products versus startups. And you know, in New York, one of the problems, I would say, it is a problem, is we have some real licensing stars here. Last year, NYU made $790 million on licensing revenue. If you're a president of a college, that looks pretty good. I mean, you could use $790 million. Now, when you unpack that, first of all, the next is Columbia at $125 million, and no one else in the country is at above $100 million. Now, interestingly, Stanford, which is known as a kind of you know, a hotbed of entrepreneurship and innovation, they have $50 million in licensing revenue. So it's not a question of how much licensing revenue, but as well how much impact you're having. So one of the things, and one of the challenges, and I don't think we have an answer to this, is how do we change the incentive structure for the universities to say, hey, you know, I want to invest my efforts in startup creation as opposed to maximizing licensing revenue, because there really is a trade-off there. If you're a tech transfer office and your priority is how do I maximize revenue, you're going to do everything you can to capture every last penny of a potential Google, right? Everybody's hoping that they have a Google out there somewhere in their professor's head. And their worst nightmare is that it becomes Google and nothing comes back to the university, because then the trustees say, hey, how'd you let this slip out of your fingers? And so we as a state, and you know, I think this is as a higher education community, not just limited to the state, need to kind of figure that out and figure, you know, what is there a better way? Because the efforts at maximizing licensing revenue often have a negative impact on your startup creation, because you're so worried about letting something slip through your fingers that you know, a lot of ideas and deals are killed in their cradle before they have a chance to really be something. So R&D intensive industry, again, we have GE, we have IBM, we have Corning, we have Welch Allyn here. So one of the things that's emerging is that R&D is getting more and more expensive, and that's good for higher education, because that means companies are going back to the universities to kind of basically share costs. And and get access to the new ideas. So one of the things we thought was a really key opportunity, and I give Santok a lot of credit for, kind of characterizing this phrase of flip the model. What the normal model is, university professors, I got a great idea, I'm working on it in the lab, finally I got, something that I can call a product or a kernel. Then you say, I got this kernel, is anybody interested? And, you think about the outside world only after you've done this product. Now, why can't we flip the model and say, let the companies organize, and on a pre-competitive basis say, here's what we see as the challenges in the 3 to 5 year outlook. We would pay for the person who can figure out X problem, and then they say, this is our big thing. Now, researchers, are anybody interested? And kind of say, let the company speak first, and the researchers respond. And that's what we meant by flip the model. And finally, we talked a lot about long-term umbrella agreements. It became very clear very quickly that the best practice is when a company and a university have an ongoing relationship, because a lot of the complications happen over one-shot deals, breaking down who owns the IP, and those arguments can get so contentious that the idea doesn't see the light of day because you can't figure out who's going to own it in the event that it is a Google. So that stuff is really minimized when you have ongoing relationships with a company. You build up trust, you build up habits of working together, and it really does make a big difference. And finally, you have access to capital. I think in general in these conversations, investors are too often overlooked. If you look at the Research Triangle in North Carolina, you look at Route 128 in Boston, you look at Silicon Valley, the characteristic there is that investors are part of the system. They're in the schools, they're in the companies talking to the CEOs, here's the new idea, we're interested in this, we're interested in that. They're part of this three-way dialogue. It's not a two-way dialogue, and if we had it all to do over again, we'd come up with a catchier name for this task force, certainly, but it would be one that also captured investors, I think, in it. Seed fund was probably the number one recommendation that we heard, that in terms of the valley of death, you need to be able to pump some cash into that earlier stage where venture is just not investing. It's too risky for venture investors. It's too expensive for some universities. There is a potential place for the state or for other investors to get involved there. One of the things that we do have great in New York State is a very well-organized angel community, and the angels have been the ones to play in this seed space primarily in New York, and that's a built-in advantage that I think we need to do more to exploit. Another thing, we had capital gains tax relief. Basically, those are both the same issue. How can you pump more resources into this early stage of the valley of death and thereby bridge that valley of death? Regional hubs for information. One of the things that I know Ed likes to mention whenever we talk about this stuff is we had one of our public hearings at CUNY we had Brian Cohen, who's on the board of trustees for the New York Angels. He said, you know what, we want more than a tax break, more than a seed fund. We want access to information. We want more deal flow. We want to hear what's out there more. And so that was a really eye-opening thing to us, and there is an opportunity for the state there and for all of us in this room to just participate more on the information flows, and that really speaks to that network, that second half, the bad news piece of what we need to do here. And then finally, integration. Basically, again, can we get the investment community in here? Of course, there is a role for government. We can't ignore government, but we can't rely on it. And that was one of the things I think I give a lot of credit to David Skorton, who was the chairman of this task force. His refrain throughout was, don't give me more state investments, don't give me more what the state can do, And that was both, I think it was a smart thing to do, but it was also a practical thing to do because we all know the fiscal situation of the state. So, my direction from the governor was, don't give me a list of investments to make at the end of this thing, because then you're setting us all up for failure. So it was really, both the answer that we found naturally and the circumstances both pointed us towards a non-government-centric model, even though government does have a clear role here. One of the things that government does is convene, right? That's what this task force was all about. And then the other thing is to act as a catalyst. Government is going to make investments, and we highlighted in our task force report some of the more powerful investments that the state has made. For example, the supercomputers at Stony Brook and at Brookhaven and at RPI, we talked about how the state made that investment, and then as a condition of that investment made sure that that supercomputer asset was available for economic development purposes, which basically meant it was available for other non-RPI, non-Stony Brook professors and researchers to work on. And in terms of those investments, they need to be made in strategic areas. We didn't try to pick anything. We said, what's out there in the state? What do we have? What are we good at? And it was very clear. Life sciences and healthcare. We train the most physicians in the country in this state, and 65% of that $4 billion in terms of the university's sponsored research is in the life sciences. It's a pretty clear message. Healthcare, nanotechnology, there's two NSF nanotechnology centers. There's SUNY Albany. There's like major investments in the state in nanotechnology. Energy, agriculture, it's just what we have in the state, and we want to target our investments in those areas. We don't want to choose winners and losers, let those winners and losers identify themselves. That was one of the things that we said. We got a little flack from New York City about not including IT in this package. Okay, so if New York City says that IT is one of their big things, that's where they make their investment. So what have we done so far, and where are we going? So in the budget in the state of the state, we had a seed fund and an R&D tax credit. The seed fund has hit a roadblock in terms of the state budget. You know, we are slashing and burning everywhere in the state budget, and generally speaking, if you're in the state of the state, it's about as sacred as it gets, and so it gives you an indication of where we're at since the seed fund has been at least temporarily taken off the table. We have made really good progress in terms of the legislature. They're very bought into this idea of a seed fund is important because we want to get more ideas out of our universities, and people are starting to talk about the Valley of Death, and that's starting to be an idea that really has some weight in the legislature. The R&D tax credit was basically, that $11 billion is a worldwide number. GE, IBM, they're doing a lot of research. They're not necessarily doing it here, right? So how can we bring some of that R&D back into the state? How do we change the value proposition for these big companies and make them say, you know what, let's take another look at New York? And one of the things that we're trying to harness right now is, you know, companies are doing some consolidations. And so where they may have 3 research and development centers around the state, they may be consolidating to 1. If we can capture some of those in the state, that's part of this strategy here. I think, yeah, okay. Non-budget. I think the non-budget stuff is honestly more important. Educating. A lot of this is changing the dialogue, right? You're starting to hear more and more people talk about the innovation economy, and it seems to be working. The next thing is, Teresa was joking with me last night, I've been hearing so much about this. If I hear innovation economy one more time, but it's important because the more we talk about it, eventually people are going to have to start, acting on what they say. There can't be a disconnect forever. Informing. Over the weekend, most of the people in this room will get an email announcing the launch of this Innovation Asset Wiki. We basically collected as much information as we could about the innovation assets around the state, and many of your centers and programs are going to be on this site. And the idea is, can we have a centralized resource for all of the innovation assets in the state? That was a request that we heard over and over again in this task force. And at some point, we went through a cataloging process, and we just figured, you know what, this is impossible. We're never going to be able to capture all of them. So why don't we create it in an open source setting? And that's what this will do. We have a university sign-on letter where about, I think, 13 or 14 of the biggest universities in the state said, the task force recommended that colleges and universities do X. We, as presidents of these universities, commit ourselves to doing all or most of these things over the coming years. And it's written as a letter to industry to say, we are open for business and we want to collaborate with you. Here's what we have to offer, and now the ball's in your court. And then finally, this measuring. You measure what you treasure. A really interesting kind of best practice was in Massachusetts, they come up with an innovation index every year. And I think Ed will probably talk about what we're doing in this state to kind of duplicate that effort. But we went out there a couple of weeks ago to talk to those guys, and they said, this report every year, it's this report here, this report every year is the most cited document in our legislature. And that makes a big difference. I mean, if people are using this as a point of departure, then all of a sudden everything they do starts to take into consideration how does this impact the innovation economy in our state. I mentioned the sign-on letters. SUNY and CUNY are both adopting kind of business liaison offices. There's been structured dialogues at Columbia, ESF, Cornell. These are happening all over the state. I went recently to a thing at Columbia where there were probably 20 colleges participating. Each one had 15 minutes to have their 3 or 4 top professors or researchers give a pitch. Here's my idea. Here's why it matters in the marketplace. Here's my contact information. And, and the audience was full of investors and companies that would be potential collaborators. And it was really, this is the dream. This is where we need to be going. And then finally, one of the things that we highlighted in the task forces was the STEM services science, what we call STEM services sciences. What does that mean? All these companies that I mentioned, IBM, GE, Corning, Kodak, Xerox, these are all companies that have, in the past decade, really moved their business model hugely to the area of services. That's where the growth in the economy is, in the services side. But in fact, nobody's really teaching services sciences. So there's a real opportunity there, and RIT, to its credit, has kind of self-identified as a leader in this area, and they're going to be working on developing that curriculum and something that can be modeled around the state, we hope. And then in terms of industry investors, one of the members of the task force, a woman named Linda Sanford, she works with IBM, and she said, she was the one that said, let us be defined not by what we say in this report, but what we do after this report. So they created something called the Armonk Group. Armonk is the headquarters of IBM, or the location of the headquarters. And they said, that group is, high-level industry people, university presidents, working together, identifying initiatives, opportunities for collaboration, and also now they're moving into defining a policy agenda for the state. What does the state need to do to make this stuff happen? So they're going to be a powerful lobby, I think. And it's, we oftentimes talk, negatively about lobbyists and lobbying, but the innovation sector doesn't have a lobby just yet. And I think this group could be a very powerful one, and one that can really identify opportunities. I mentioned angel investor networks. That's a real built-in advantage for the state. We have about 7 or 8 angel networks, and increasingly they're talking to each other and trying to start syndicating deals. And I think that's going to be the crucial opportunity for addressing what we call in upstate, the upstate venture desert. And then we have some other groups here. We have this upstate community, Unitech, Syracuse Tech Garden, Upstate Venture Connect, and the CEO here is Nasser Ali. He's just told me today that it's fully up and running and that they have kind of full capacity right now. And it's stuff like that that links us. And I think it speaks to our primary challenge here, which is geography. The one thing that is kind of holding us back in a way is New York is a very big state. When we talk about innovation ecosystems around the country, the Research Triangle, Route 128, Silicon Valley, they're city-sized. And we have a great set of assets, but it's state-sized. And so our big challenge is how can we overcome this? Now, we live in the 21st century. Technology is at our fingertips. There are ways to get around this, but I think this is what we need to do. I apologize about this chart. This is a great chart of all of the different colleges around the state. It really gives you an impression of how much stuff we have here, but it's really much better at poster sized. But I'm happy to share this presentation with anybody, and you can kind of see the details. But really, geography is the thing that, when we talk about networks and why doesn't New York have the network that we characterize as other effective innovation ecosystems, it's really, this is a primary challenge. How do we deal with our size? It's both an advantage, and right now it's our hindrance. Can we do something about it? So I think, people say, well, what's the number one recommendation of this task force? And I always try to push back on that. There isn't a number one recommendation of this task force. We need to build a community, and within that community, it needs to be a movement where everybody in that community takes it upon themselves to do something about this. No one program is going to save us. A $25 million seed fund, whether we have it this year or not, it's not going to change. It's not going to change things in and of itself. What is going to change things is the people that interact with each other and take it upon themselves to make this happen. So a couple interesting things. This afternoon, I got an invitation to Digital Rochester's Innovation Jam Session. So that sounds pretty cool. It's the first ever Innovation Jam Session they're billing it as. And it's basically, senior people getting together, listening to some jazz, getting to know each other, building that community, becoming friends, having both a personal and a professional relationship, and building up on that. That's the network. That's the networking that we're talking about, not just formal networking, informal networking. New York Tech Meetup. When we started this task force, 10 months ago now, New York Tech Meetup had about 8,000 members. Now it has almost 14,000 members over a few months. New York Tech Meetup is basically a monthly kind of hangout of technology people that they go to Cooper Union. There's a 300-person auditorium there, and entrepreneurs and inventors come and basically pitch their ideas, and here's what I'm working on, ain't it cool? And you can't get in there. You cannot get a ticket to this New York Tech Meetup. Everybody's dying to get it. Everyone's watching on the web. It's the hottest thing in town in New York City. But it's informal. It's nothing. It's not a program. It's just a couple of people that said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we met up and we had these conversations? And then turns out it wasn't just a couple of people. It's 13,000 people. Like I said, not so much new in this report. And we're not the only ones saying it. There's been 3 reports already this year essentially on the same thing. The Center for an Urban Future did a New York City-centric report. We did our New York State-centric report. And the Public Policy Institute, which works with the New York State Business Council, did another report, also state-focused, but really was focused on a lot of tax credits and how do we change the business climate in the state. So people are talking about this, and I think it's important and it's something we should appreciate, that whenever you hear elected official get up and talk about the economy, they're talking about how do we increase innovation in the state. And finally, from a government point of view, you're really seeing change in the agencies. One of the advantages that we have in the state is we have a NISTAR, we have a NYSERDA, which is the Energy Research and Development Agency. But what they're doing now is really exactly what we're talking about. They're bringing together this community of investors, companies, and higher education institutions, and enforcing that collaboration and sweetening that collaboration with some funding. A couple of great examples are the New York State Battery Energy Storage Technology Initiative, New York BEST we call it. It basically, it had its genesis in the stimulus funding and said, but whoever figures out the battery conundrum is going to be the leader, is going to be a leader in the next generation of the economy. New York State has a lot of expertise, it turns out, in batteries. Can we get everybody together? Can we bridge the geographic boundaries that we have and get them all working together towards this end of can we win the battery race in New York State? And I think we're well positioned to do that here. Smart Grid, down on Long Island, similar story. Smart Grid, a big opportunity. We're bringing together companies and government and higher education institutions to work on this smart grid problem. And finally, this event here, the Technology Commercialization Clinic Network, the Professor Hagelin was telling me last night, it's expanding. We're looking for new partners. There's a new one opening in Brooklyn, at Brooklyn Law Center. So big opportunities. Programs are starting to focus on this. And one of the things we heard a lot about is, don't let this stuff be administration-centric, right? We all know Governor Patterson's not going to be running next year. He's not going to be the governor next year. So is this stuff going to live beyond him? I think these are very good programs that speak to his understanding of this issue and to his legacy. But what's going to happen when he's gone? Is the ground going to fall? And I think no. I think that's the important thing, that the agencies themselves have taken on a different culture and an attitude of how do we do more of this. And that's really part of the movement idea, that everybody is part of this. So what can we do? How do we keep this going? I think we need a talent policy. Above all, this is about the people. If you're going to have a movement, you need the people involved in that movement. That's an America problem, but that's also, we're talking about New York State here, so New York State can and should do many things to that. Obviously, this is a visa issue. That's not New York State. Although, we do have a delegation, and I tell you, every time the delegation asks us or asks the higher education unit for its priorities, visas are always number one on that. Study New York is an initiative where the state's colleges, both public and private, are getting together to brand New York State as a higher education destination for international students. We're the #1 importer of students in the country, New York State is. We want to keep that distinction, and we want to grow that distinction. And we think the more people that are coming in, the more will stay, and the more that the economy will grow here. And then finally, local quality of life initiatives. Ultimately, people want to go where they like to live. I mean, beyond any kind of set of assets, right? So something like a digital jam session, it's cute, but it makes a difference. It makes a difference in the lived experience of our entrepreneurs. Duplicate best practices. I think one of the biggest values of this report, frankly, is saying, here's what's working, and just hopefully people will read it and say, oh, that gives me an idea. What about doing this? Or, we could have a version of that in our school or in our city. So this is, again, it's incumbent on all of us to take these ideas and duplicate them. And collaborate. That's the game, right? I mean, no institution is going to be able to win by themselves. But because New York has this incredible diversity and strength of assets, if we can bring them together, that's the whole game. And finally, pass it on. I think, I'm seeing the same people again and again, and I think there is a community developing here, and it's kind of like coming home. I see all my friends here in this room, and that's great. And I think the point is we need to expand our community. We need to, kind of take it upon ourselves to be ambassadors for these ideas, and each one of the people in this room I know has their own big network. And the whole thing is, can you harness that network and get them to see the same things that you do and make it happen? I want to end on something that has kind of taken over my life over the last few months since this task force, and that's the legislation that's pending right now in the budget. And it has to do with FIA is what we call it, but it's the Public Higher Education Empowerment and Innovation Act. And it was part of the governor's budget, and it is very controversial, and the future of this act is very much in doubt right now. In terms of the dynamic with the legislature, the Senate is fully on board, the Assembly remains skeptical, and right now we're in the pull and tug. There's two things I want to highlight in that act, and I think they speak to this innovation issue. One is differential tuition, which is highly controversial, and public-private partnerships. I'll start with public-private partnerships. Right now, if you're a public college in New York State and you want to work with a company and that company wants to lease some land from you and say, we're going to build something on your campus, you need a specific law to let that happen. You need the full legislative process to allow that to happen. So basically, if Pfizer approaches Sam Stanley at Stony Brook and says, we'd like to build something on your campus, and our researchers will work with your researchers, and we'll share the IP, and we'll have interns, and they'll come work for us, and all that good stuff, Sam Stanley, the president of Stony Brook, has to say, yeah, that sounds great, I can get you a maybe in 10 months. And Pfizer is not going to wait around for that. And so what we said is we need to streamline this process. We understand that this is state-owned land, but we need to streamline this process because what the innovation economy is, what it looks like around the country, is collaboration on campus between universities and industry. And what we're hearing as the pushback is, well, we want to keep our universities pure. We don't want to corrupt them with private influence. And I think that's part of the shifting of the dialogue that we all, as a kind of innovation community in this room, need to work on. I mean, we need to help people understand that companies aren't bad, that collaboration between industry and university is not, in fact, isn't bad, is exactly what we're looking for, and we need to do everything we can to facilitate that effort. Secondly, on the issue of differential tuition, there's a lot of conversation of, well, we don't want a kid ever to be in a situation where he says, I'd really love to study chemistry at Buffalo, but I'm going to go be a teacher and study at Plattsburgh because the Buffalo education is $1,000 more expensive. Access is a crucial issue. We need to make sure as many people as possible can get into our system, right? We need to take advantage of as many brains as we can. We also have to recognize that 80% of the students at SUNY and CUNY are staying in state. They are, by all accounts, our workforce in the state. So we also need to think about access to opportunity on the outside. What happens when you get out? I mentioned as the first thing for universities, when companies are looking to collaborate, they're looking for one thing and one thing only, and that's excellence. They want to work with the best. Part of the differential tuition issue is about quality. is about saying we understand that there is a difference between a research university and a liberal arts college. And part of that education is what we need to kind of convey, I think, to the legislature. And it's too bad that Assemblyman Magnarelli won't be here, because I think he's someone that really gets it, and he really does understand the innovation system in New York State. And even he and I have kind of had some arguments about this. So it's a tough issue, but I think it's one that we need to embrace. And if anybody here is friendly with the speaker, I'd urge you to call him and tell him we need to have this passed. Thank you very much. Sir.
Go back about to your fifth slide. You had a nice diagram going across the bottom on a new product development. And it listed risk involved and put marketing way at the end, just before market introduction. That's the one. Okay? I would contend that market risk should be taken care of very early in the process, not at the end. And that you should send engineering out with marketing to determine what the customer requirements are, and to determine if it works, which the engineers and technicians will take care of. Not that, but once it works, will it sell? And that reduces your risk entirely.
I think it's an excellent point. I mean, I think that speaks directly to this issue of flipping the model and saying, kind of setting up research agenda based on what companies are looking for, as opposed to kind of creating our products in a vacuum and then seeing, is anybody interested? I think it's an excellent point.
Universities really don't have the capacity to make those market determinations. Industry is coming into the university and saying, you make this, we'll license it. It's a whole different paradigm. Yes, sir?
Hi, Dan, thank you for your remarks, and thank you for mentioning Upstate Venture Connect. I really want to commend you for the consistent effort on identifying the need for more seed funding, and also Teresa and Judy for the work that they've been doing. One of the things that we have found is that there is tremendous capacity for additional angel funding in all of our communities across the state. The challenge is that we are way behind as a state in terms of incentivizing people to enter this for the first time. And part of the reason is that in other entrepreneurial hubs, there is a more established tradition of angel investment, so people are much more comfortable as a community and a culture in doing that. In the case of New York State, there are very few people who have been angel funded themselves and grown faster with companies. So it is an opportunity for the state to really move forward aggressively and put us on par with a number of other states. And there's a tremendous amount of information available from the Angel Capital Association in terms of a comparison against other states as well. So thank you, and throw something comes up.
Thanks. Sorry?
Yes, so I looked across the bottom there, just to follow what was said, is that 80% of startup companies are funded by personal assets and family members, those that are successful. So it's really the individual creating a sense of entrepreneurship within individuals. And how do you train them? And so where does that fit in your bottom line? But this is all high-level stuff. People, how do you develop a serial entrepreneur? Where does that fit in that scheme that can go across the valley of death? So it's somehow we need to put into this mix the creation of serial entrepreneurs and training. Quite frankly, that's nothing teaches like experience, and so we have to. I'm thinking towards mentoring systems of successful entrepreneurs, of alumni from our institutions that have done it, that come back and help training. We've got to, we need more angel funding. That's even a bit further along. The numbers are 80% of successful startups are funded. In fact, they don't obviously have to meet payroll on Friday, but they actually don't worry about it because they're putting their own assets, their family members, close friends, and so it's the spirit of entrepreneurship. It's understanding, it's training, it's developing serial entrepreneur mindsets. We need to think about where that fits on that bottom line.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we highlighted some of the programs heard about more is entrepreneurs in residence, that you have someone on campus who's done it, and they kind of train both faculty and students in terms of, here's how I made it, and here's how you can make it. And I think, for example, at NYU Poly, every student that comes in their first year, their first semester, they have a class on entrepreneurship. And it's not just about, at first we said, how can we get our professors to be more entrepreneurial? Well, I think it's a lot about training students that eventually become professors or become entrepreneurs. And how do we get our students in this state to think in terms of, this is cool, how do I make a product out of this? How do I start my own company out of that? And that's the cultural shift that I think New York needs to make in order to be a leader in this innovation economy. Sir.
People who know me probably find this ironic, but I think this is really an impressive report, especially given the diversity or discordance of the people and the views that you must have received. For example, when I look at this slide, I can think of 4 different ways to nitpick on it, or to make substantive comments, which is what the person who talked about marketing, What you had said earlier was that presumably this is the start of a dialogue, a continuing dialogue, to help either resolve some of those continuing disagreements or to form more opinion going forward. What is you had mentioned the website, I believe, what is the state's role? And presumably the state doesn't intend this to be a static process, so what's the state's role from where you are now going forward? In the absence of funding, since the state has no money, and in the delay in timing to enact some of the programs, what's your going forward to continue dialogue on this whole process and to encourage people to interact and move what's already a good start further forward?
Well, I think you're right. There isn't money for new products, or new projects, but there will be, and we kind of. One of the goals of the task force was to say, in the event, when there is some funding, here's how you would target it. But I think the convening role, you can't knock that. That was one of the most interesting things of this process was the task force under the governor's name really was able to pull together a really impressive set of minds to say, let's all get around the table and kind of hash this out and set up that agenda. And so I think the convening role is important. I mentioned that the wiki is up, and that'll be something that is available. And the government's role, I think, is again to prime the pump, not to necessarily to play out the string. So.
Will the government do this? So you set up a wiki, so people will make comments. How is the government going to react going forward? I wouldn't expect the state to solve the problem, nor would I want it to.
Right.
But I would expect the state to react to some of the further suggestions. What's the mechanism for that?
Well, one of the issues that was brought up in the task force was the need for kind of an innovation advisory council, and I think I think that's the kind of thing you do in the beginning of administration as opposed to at the end of administration. So, I'll be excited to see how the next administration does that. But this Armonk group that I mentioned, they are kind of acting in a way as a de facto advisory council. And so that's something that came out of this task force. And I think, it's about who gets, a lot of policy is made on personal relationships, and it's a question of who has access in the halls of Albany and how they get that access. And I think more and more the people in Albany are interested in hearing from angel investors, are interested in hearing from groups like the Armonk group that are university industry collaborators. And so I think it's really a question of the attitudinal shift that's happening in the state, and the programs and the initiatives, they all follow from that. And so I think, if there's something you can, say what you want the legacy of this report to be, it would be that. It'd be that shift in attitude, the shift in the agency programming, the shift in kind of the rhetoric on the rhetoric of the elected officials. And all of that, has a inevitable kind of programmatic impact. But again, I don't want to point to a single program and say, this is what we're going to do to make it happen, because there isn't that. There is no silver bullet here. It's going to be a lot of little things, and it's going to be incumbent on all of us, not just the government, to make that happen. So.
I have two comments. The first one is, I agree completely with the notion of marketing position. That really has a major impact on how deep that valley that is. I can make it shallow correctly. The second point is, it has to do with the University of Utah and this notion we're talking about there. I happen to be from the University of Utah, but part of the issue there is there aren't any large corporations there to suck up PhD students. So it generates a very strong entrepreneurial behavior. So there's kind of a trade-off.
Can you guys hear?
Sorry, there's a difference between, there's a trade-off at the University of Utah between corporate entities and startups. Corporate entities like to grab strong people from universities to work within their systems. If there aren't any of those, you can generate a lot of startups if you have people who are smart within the startups. So that's an interplay that doesn't happen in New York State. You have GE, Kodak, lots of big companies that want to get the big lift. So part of the comment is how do you generate entrepreneurial people? And it's not necessarily always close relationships with large corporations. In fact, it's exactly the opposite in many cases. So this, and a lot of the discussion you had in the document had to do with how to get large corporations to work with universities. And I would argue in many cases that actually generates less startups and goes against what you're trying to do. So there's a whole dichotomy of certain efforts that you're trying to work on.
That was certainly a tension that was present on the task force and in our discussions about how do you do one versus the other. We're recognizing we have to work with our assets, right? And what we have, we do have big companies here, so we don't want to neglect that opportunity associated with that. But we can do more to promote entrepreneurship on campuses. It's interesting in this kind of community. Everybody's talking about the book Startup Nation, about why there's so many startups in Israel. And my father's from Israel, and I was there recently, and I was kind of just chatting with some people about that and what they think about it. And they say, thank God we don't have oil, because that's why we have startups. And in a way, I characterize this story of Wall Street, or you can maybe make the argument similarly about our big corporations, that they've kind of lulled us to sleep in a way, that it was easy to rely on Wall Street again and again, and particularly through the 90s, where it was just so easy. I mean, they were just manufacturing cash, so why worry about anything else? So in a way, we've woken up now. I mean, it wasn't a pleasant wake up, but we've woken up, and I think now we're in the position to start doing something about it. So again, thanks everybody.
Two things I neglected to mention before I introduce Daniel. He drove from Albany last night to be here. He's in the middle of these intense negotiations over this bill, and will be leaving immediately now to return. So it's quite a sacrifice. And Daniel's also walking the walk. He is on his way to Harvard Law School this fall with the intention of majoring in technology commercialization and economic development. So it comes full circle. Our next speaker is Ed Reinford. Ed, again, was a member of the task force and is the executive director of MyStar. It's been a great privilege to work with Ed over the past 3 years. This is our second 3-year designation, and it's just been great working with Ed and his team this time around. And Ed really supported us and helped us in everything we've done. Ed?
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, all. Let me just begin by thanking the good folks at Welch Allen and Julie Scheimer for hosting this. If you want to talk about innovation and creativity and corporations and what the model is, this is the model. A company that many years ago understood that it could not succeed like it wanted to without embracing change and change from outside and ideas from outside. And have such a gracious setting is something we appreciate much. Let me just, before I begin, take a chance to publicly acknowledge the role of Daniel Doctori. Daniel, as Ted said, will be leaving shortly. He's about to embark upon the great American tour with his buddies from grade school and high school. If the budget gets resolved, and you gotta like the fact that the priority for a Columbia grad going into Harvard is now getting SUNY reform. And it reminds me of that story of John F. Kennedy getting the honorary Yale degree, saying, I got the best of all worlds. I got a Yale degree and a Harvard education. We got the best of both worlds. We got a Columbia grad in his last few days trying to get what I really do think is the legacy issue for the Patterson administration. Can we bring a reform to SUNY that frees up the creativity of its body? So, Daniel, I want you to leave right now, get back. And he didn't have this beard before he began the negotiations. He's got a mean look to him, which he needs. And whatever it takes to get it done, please get it done. But I want to thank you for your work as Executive Director of the Higher Ed. Let me just repeat a couple things that Daniel mentioned that I want to highlight. And that is, when you look at this task force report and its recommendations, one of the keys is it's not going to be government that brings it about. This was not a government-dependent recommendation. Indeed, this thing that's referred to as the Armonk Group was intentionally stated that it's going to be our business leaders, our university leaders, that will drive this. The transition that will take place, that does take place in government, cannot handle the challenge that we see here, what we're trying to do. And so I very much want to emphasize that this was a very practical set of recommendations, and I give President Skorton credit for that. I mean, it's no surprise that we need to diversify our economy. I mean, that's not rocket science. How we do it in ways that can be implemented and done in our lifetime. We've all been parts of commissions and task forces that had nice reports that were on the shelf, and not much happened. And I'm particularly impressed by what's taking place following the report, and that's basically what I want to touch upon. But let me just take a few minutes and talk about why I am confident that we can bring about change. And basically, it's because I believe, and I have the good fortune to work for NYSTAR, and I've had 3 years of state service this month, and it's been a remarkable 3 years. Now, I was 30 years with the Business Council, and to have a chance to work in public service is something you should experience. And if you get the opportunity in the next administration, the job you want is mine. I walk into offices, and I say, when I walk into your office, nothing bad can happen. I can't tax you, I can't fine you, I don't regulate you, but if we get along, good things can happen. And I get to meet some of the most upbeat people in this state and this country. People who are working on new products and ideas. Everyone's got the answer to whatever problem there is. Everyone has an idea to make the world better. And it's this remarkable position. In my first month on the job, I recall the experience I had. I got invited to one of these global conferences, and we've all been to those. And most of them you go to, and people are, woe is me, number of American graduates in science and technology is less than China, less than India. You feel like the 300 Spartans. I mean, sooner or later you're going to get beat if it's just by numbers. But Sam Palmisano, the president of IBM, goes up to this conference, and I'll never forget it. He says, let me tell you why I'm confident about the role of America in the global economy. He said, let's pretend that global competition is a card game. And we got 12 of us, 12 of the largest superpowers at the poker table. Which hand do you want to be? And he said, I'll pick the American hand, the hand that the United States have. And let me tell you why. He says, it's our youth. He said, we don't appreciate in this country that our young people are more entrepreneurial, have a willingness to take risk and want to create their own businesses. He said, it's a remarkable change. He said, think about when we were young. You know, we're in school and people would talk, they didn't talk about entrepreneurs. They talk about maybe inventors. And that question would go out, who's your favorite inventor? And think about it. We always picked someone who was dead. He said, now if you go into a classroom and you ask a young student who they admire most in business, you know, they talk about Gates, and they talk about Jobs, and they talk about the guy who formed the Android. They know this thing. And I travel around, and most recently, I've been impressed and maybe shocked by some of the survey results I hear about the percentage of students who want to form their own business, not to go to work for established company. And at UAlbany, I was talking to the dean of business schools. 60% of the students want to start their own business. I talked to others about the school. They're talking about 30% of the entire school want to start their own business. And I won't give away the answer that I believe President Dessler is going to give about the most interesting survey results, and I won't tell it because I think you're going to cover it. May I tell it? I did hear it the other day from Nasser, so maybe, unless he was telling me something out of school, but he told me that you did a survey of your students. And 1% of the student population at RIT already has a business. Now, we talk about, that's over 100 businesses already in operation. Now, we talk about success stories, about starting 100 businesses, new businesses, with all the programs the state runs, and we're proud of it. On campus, without any government funding, there's 100 businesses that these students are already running. And that's an amazing statistic. When I was 1 month on the job, when I was 1 month on the job, I happened to visit new president Dessler at RIT, and we were sitting down. He only gives you a half hour, by the way. If you ever get a meeting with him, understand this: he gives no one more than a half hour. Most people he only gives 10 minutes. I was very pleased. I got almost a half hour, and right towards the end of it, he says, "You know, I've been here a couple of months now. Let me tell you what I'm going to do next year. I'm going to have an innovation celebration on campus." He says, and I bet you I'm going to get thousands of people coming. I'm looking up at him and I said, setting the benchmark pretty high, good luck. Well, in May of 2008, RIT had its first RIT Imagination, a celebration of innovation and creativity on campus. The first year, 20,000 people from the community and from the campus. Not just the engineers, but the arts, the humanities, celebrating what they're doing, talking about projects. Again, the power of our youth. You know? Our youth have always saved this country. They will save us once more. You know, we survived Elvis. We're celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the Twist. You know, Chubby Checkers was just in Albany. And back then, remember the dialogue. Oh, God, what have our youth come to? They're not like we used to be. They don't have the same drive. We survived the Vietnam War. We survived the hippies. And we always underestimate the power of our youth. And if there's anything that gives us optimism, it is that. Let me just take a few minutes and talk about some of the things that have taken place since the report was issued that give us a little more basis to think that we can succeed. Let me start with an event that took place in New York City. It involves life science. It involves our biomedical strengths. Daniel touched upon the fact that the report mentioned that New York State, #2, NIH funding. We get over a couple $2 billion a year from the National Institute of Health. We know we have great research in biomedical research. And it's true in the city, it's true in Rochester, it's true in Buffalo. We have these pockets, but we don't produce jobs. You know, we have great research, but we're not seeing the same success that they see in Boston, that they see in North Carolina, that they see in California. And why is it? Why is it that we don't have this emphasis on commercialization? Well, a strange thing happened. There was a summit meeting on biomedical innovation in New York City. Columbia University hosted it. And all the academic medical schools came together for the first time with the venture capital community in New York State. And each university, each academic medical center was allowed to have 2 presentations during a 15-minute period. Well, the competition to get that 15-minute slot from the schools was intense. And in an all-day conference, the venture community and the academic medical community came together and talking about research that was ready to be commercialized. First time they came together, Columbia hosted it. By the time the meeting was over, 4 other academic medical centers signed up to host the next conference. We are not short of ideas. We have ideas. We need a way, however, with a little assistance, a little organization, to do what President Dessler did in Rochester, is to provide an opportunity for this talent to be exposed. He didn't create the creativity on RIT campus, he just exposed it. And part of the role of government and part of what the task force is talking about is how do we coordinate that activity? How do we coordinate it around the state? Daniel mentioned an individual, Brian Cohen, the vice chairman of the New York City Angel Network, and the testimony that he gave to the task force. Now, one thing we know we have in this state is money. Right? We just don't know how to tap it. And why is it that we have all this capital that flies to the West Coast and invests in Silicon Valley? Is it that we don't have ideas here? Are they smarter on the West Coast? Are they more creative on the West Coast? Or are we just not doing something? Well, Brian Cohen, who's one of the angel investors and leaders, said that, let me tell you this, he said, in New York City, we have more money than we have opportunities. We're angels, we're entrepreneurs. Most of us have created and flipped a couple companies. That's our business, that's our hobby, that's what we like to do. If you're telling me there are ideas upstate and opportunities for investment upstate, I'm telling you, we've got the money. And Brian Cohen has since come upstate to a couple of venture forums with Nasser and elsewhere and wants to be and is starting to partner and become part of that network. It just took a little time, a little encouragement to come upstate, see the opportunities that are here. Tony Collins is here. One of the most successful venture operations in this state is something called SPEC. The Seaway Private Equity Corporation. And this venture capital organization that invests in upstate New York only invests in St. Lawrence County. Now, we run a little venture operation in our shop. But to have 10 deals in St. Lawrence County, ranging from nanotechnology to software to bioenergy, I mean, it's remarkable. And what it shows you, it can be done. We just need to pull the parties together. So when we look at what needs to be done in this state and what the task force is saying can be done, it can be done. Daniel mentioned the SUNY effort and the position of Chancellor Nancy Zemfer. She also just came out with her strategic plan. And many of you participated in the roundtables, and many of you have talked and participated in the unveiling of the strategic plan, a 5-pillar program of what SUNY can be. Number 1 pillar, the first pillar, is about entrepreneurship and the contributions of the state university to the economy of the state of New York. Think about that. What a remarkable, remarkable change in attitude. That we can, as a state university, be contributing to the economy of the state by tapping the creativity and the innovation of our youth. The fact that we have such a great public-private partnership in New York State is unique. You go to other states, and I talk to my counterparts in other states about how our universities work together. They say, no, they don't. They write letters when they want a grant. They don't work together. I said, yes, we do. We can collaborate, and we do collaborate in many ways. And they said, no, Michigan doesn't ever. University of Michigan never collaborates with Michigan State. And you can go around the country and talk about that. We have some uniqueness. We have a richness of our private universities and a richness of our state university. And that ability to tap those resources for innovation when we have partners who not only can lead but want to lead. You know, you can't drag a horse to water. If our university leaders did not want to be part of this effort, I wouldn't be here today saying we can exceed and succeed. And we can. Our university leaders from around this state are indeed some of the drivers of our economy and our future. And it's because of them that we have so much confidence. I'd like to talk a little bit about NYSTAR's specific responsibilities as it relates to the task force. And I won't dwell on it too much. But Daniel mentioned you measure what you treasure. And he referenced the Massachusetts Innovation Economy Index. And something that's very important in Massachusetts, once a year they unveil how they're doing in the economy. They measure themselves against 10 leading states. New York's one of the 10. So they measure the performance in a whole range of indicators. They identify and have identified their 11 strategic industry clusters. And they measure how those clusters are doing against the rest of the country. And this year, for the first time, they started a global index. And part of the task force recommendations, we need to do the same. We need to understand how well we're performing. We need to identify our strategic industry clusters. And there are many things that we can identify, and we will, on patents and innovations and whatnot. There's one category, however, that's critical to the task force recommendation, and that is partnerships between universities and companies. And one of the most difficult challenges we have as we try to work out how we're going to do this is what constitutes a partnership? When we talk about master agreements, what constitutes a master agreement? How do we make it easier for a company to come on campus and deal with not just one school, but all the schools? Licensing agreement, whatever it is. What constitutes a true partnership? We see it here with Welch Allyn and Blue Highway and what they're doing with universities, Syracuse, but many others throughout the state. They understand what it means. How do we quantify it for other corporations? So when we live in this era of open innovation in corporations, where corporations understand that no matter how good they once were, they're not smart enough to compete against the rest of the world by themselves. They need the best minds. This is an opportunity we have as a society to participate in a new generation of discovery in ways we never have. You know, I raise the question all the time. If you had a choice in your lifetime to be in any era of science and discovery, which era would you pick? Would you rather have the drudgery of discovery years ago when everything was one at a time and one experiment at a time? Or would you like this era of supercomputers, microarray machines, where you can do thousands and thousands of experiments in a time frame that was not known to other generations? If you are a creative mind and you want to participate in discovery, this is the era you want to participate in. You have a global platform. I remember when I first began, I was looking at some of the remarks of some of the leaders around the world about what they thought of science and discovery. And the president of India talked about the role of India in the world economy and in discovery. And he said, never before has the generation in this country had the ability to solve the world's problems. And he said, we have the chance as a country, as researchers, as product developers, to solve some of the biggest problems facing mankind. Whether they're global in terms of the environment, whether they're global in terms of energy. You know, and it opened my mind that we're no longer competing in terms of politics of one country over another. We are competing to solve world problems. Energy today is on the agenda. The environment, global warming. We have a chance to participate. And we have strength in this state that can be brought to bear on the world's problems, and in doing so will help New York's economy. I have the good fortune to head up a small little agency that works with some of the best minds, Centers for Advanced Technology, 15 around the state, leaders in their area of technology. I believe shortly we'll be working with all the centers of excellence. And when we talk about collaboration, business and industry, it's not a theoretical discussion. And I'd like to come back to one recent example of what we can do to show our potential in the state. I saw Ed Bogish to just recently duck his head in from the Syracuse Center of Excellence. Syracuse Center of Excellence recently took the lead in a submittal to the Department of Energy on something called ERIC Hub. The Department of Energy is putting out a proposal for a huge funding opportunity, $125 million over 5 years. The specific area is building energy efficiency. And unlike most federal research proposals, this award will award the $125 million based upon 25% of the application being reviewed for research. 60% of the application is for deploying technology. A lot of the technology we have in this state, in this country, it's proven technology, we just haven't deployed it. We know what we can do with biomass crops, we know what we can do, we just don't scale it. So this award was for building energy technology, one of the most competitively sought applications and grants in this country. 12 submittals from around the country. Competition is intense. What distinguishes New York in this application? What did Syracuse bring together in this state that's unique? Well, when you think about it, you step back, there are a couple things we have. Tony Collins points out that we have 3 climate zones. Now, we're submitting this application. We go from the north, in the North Country, down to New York City, hot, humid summers, and in between, we have three climate zones. Okay, that's good. That'll give you a couple points in the review. What do we really have that distinguishes New York? We have buildings. And if you're trying to deploy technology for energy efficiency to buildings, you need buildings. You need building owners and you need building operators. So in the consortium that was pulled together for this purpose, what do we have? We have Syracuse University working with NYU. Who in NYU? The Skype Real Estate School, one of the most sophisticated centers for real estate operators and owners. Who else we have? We got Clarkson. We got Stony Brook. We got Columbia. All different elements. But who else do we have? We have the building owners and the operators. But not just the building owners and the operators. We have the banks, the financiers, the insurers. The consortium that came together for this application, believe me, was impressive. But what was most impressive was the fact that this was real. People weren't just joining this because they wanted to do it for the school. They want to bring savings to their building operation. They want to deploy technology. The designers, the architects, the people who are building these entities want to have state-of-the-art because their customers want it. And in this application, we were joined by not just our CATS and not just our Centers of Excellence, but our regional technology organization. Bob Trachtenberg is in the back, where we identified all the people in our regions, the suppliers to the building industry, the people who have a vested interest, skin in the game, and wanting to be ahead of the curve when it comes to their industry. And this project came together, and what it showed us was the power of what we discuss here. If we come together, what can we do? It's remarkable the assets that we have. So when we're talking about, what we want to do, what we can do it. We've shown that we can do it. We've got the desire, the willingness, and the expertise in this state to succeed in ways that we haven't thought of if we come together. And what we need most of all is a little encouragement, a little coordination, and a lot of effort. And I'm here today to say I see this around the state. I'm just not giving you a happy talk. we have the potential to come together, to innovate, and to propel this state to the next generation. And so, on behalf of the task force, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share some ideas of what we can do, to encourage you to join this noble effort in whatever way you can, and to take us the next step. So with that, Ted, I thank you. Oh, I just, by the way, I meant this is in my prepared remarks, but looking at Ted, I said 60% was the deployment, 25% was the research, so there's a couple percentages left. One was 5% for intellectual property. What you could do, what the applicant proposes to do to streamline the processing and the application for intellectual property. Well, Ted was assigned the lead for this little task force of how do you get first the different IP offices from the universities and the companies to come together, and could we agree on a way to streamline? And when Ted called me and said, Ed, I'd like you to participate in this conference call, I cringed. I said, oh my God, I've been through this before. It's going to be painful. It's like pulling teeth. But in a remarkably short period of time of an hour and a half, Columbia University, RPI, Syracuse, and SUNY agreed on a process. They agreed that they're going to let Columbia take the lead. Columbia's Tech Transfer Office has perhaps one of the soundest track records in licensing income, and I know Bill Dessler doesn't like to talk about licensing, but the fact that their tech transfer office was so successful and had different processes. Every campus has a different IP policy, and you think you couldn't get over. Thanks to Ted and his statesmanship and handling this and taking on the assignment of writing the master agreement for the universities and the companies on IP policy. And Ted, there's much that we want to thank you for your leadership in the Science and Technology Law Center, but for that contribution. And if in an hour and a half you can get IP attorneys to agree to a common process, believe me, the rest of this stuff is easy. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's get
I'm really interested in the
energy help.
yes, the energy assistance, and I would like to know if there is any consideration being given to developing hybrid systems that are decentralized, that would actually leverage natural resources locally to create a new distributed smart grid paradigm for New York.
Good question. The question is in the realm of the energy.
Which would get us off of importing our energy resources into the state.
Is there any consideration to be given to locally based, regionally based, distributive energy sources? The answer is yes. However, the problem is at this point in time, it's all pilots. If I have one...
Sorry to interrupt you, but what about the legislative and regulatory barriers that are in place and which are decades old in this state, which make it literally impossible to innovate in this area? And what is going to be done about that? Because when we get to the point where we get beyond pilots and we get to deployment and implementation, there are some very significant barriers in place which need to be addressed legislatively.
I agree. The comment was that there are barriers legislatively, regulatory-wise, to doing what people want to do from a distributed power. Couple comments. You're absolutely right that those barriers exist, and we can't innovate like we would want to. We have a regulatory structure that was based upon, 100 years ago of how you deliver power. We had one bad experiment with being creative with the 6-cent law on hydro, and that has since stifled any new innovation. The best example, NiStar was one of the investors in what is the largest commercial short willow farm in the country. We got 1,000 acres of these things called shrub willows, which can grow to 20 feet tall in 3 years. Their energy value is immense. Technology is proven. We've got these pilots that prove you can do this. And, you know, from a farmer standpoint, from a New York State, this is ideal. We can grow these in every part of the state that you can't grow crops. We're not going to compete with crops. We got this energy. It's proven. Why can't you do it? You can't get approval to scale it. Right? You can't get someone to do a guaranteed rate of return. Farmers are smart people. They're not going to enter into a deal to plant 100 acres of crop unless they know they're going to get paid. But to get paid, you got to wait 3 years. And they're not waiting 3 years unless there's a guaranteed source. The utilities who want to do it can't get the Public Service Commission to agree you can do it. Now, you flash forward, there's all types of distributive options that are based upon storage. And one of the good things going on in the state is this battery energy storage and technology initiative. How do you store energy? Important for hybrids, important for wind, important for all types of alternative. Unless we can store it, this interruptible, renewable power is not of much use to the grid. But to get over that, you need to have a change in policy at the state and national level that you're going to allow this and encourage it. So, yes, they are considering. We just haven't solved it.
They're FOIAs, Financial Opportunity Announcements. So this FOIA from the Department of Energy was almost 100 pages, not counting all sorts of appendices. And there are all sorts of different topics that were required to be addressed, and one of which, very importantly, was policy, economics, and regulation. So absolutely, they're thinking precisely about the kinds of issues you're raising and combining it in with the basic research, applied research, and all other kinds of things. That was there.
Yes, sir. In fact.
Good morning, I'm Walt Cookman from Brookhaven National Lab. One of the things that was not mentioned yet today, because the focus has been on the university-oriented infrastructure, is the fact that New York has a unique advantage in having a major global research center in energy and materials and physics available as part of this much larger innovation ecosystem. And I just wanted to mention that as part of this consideration, I know many of the initiatives that have been discussed today, Brookhaven is already a part. But I wanted to raise the profile of Brookhaven as a key element in this infrastructure, especially with our energy future that we're all facing and the capabilities that are available at that site. And so I invite you, as you consider the future of the state of New York, how we can bring that science to you and the various methods of partnering that we have available through the Department of Energy system as well. Thanks.
Well, let me echo. Sam Aronson was the head of the Brookhaven National Lab, was a member of our task force. 10 years ago, this gentleman would not be here. Brookhaven is undergoing a tremendous change, has gone outreach to the rest of the state to let you know it's New York's only national lab. It wants to partner with everyone in this state. You know, if you ever have a need for a super collider, they got one of them, right? But if you want to talk about high-level physics research and the ability to work with some of the greatest minds in this country, it's Brookhaven National Lab. It's your lab. It's a national lab. It's a national user lab, which means you have the right to use and partner with that laboratory, and it wants to. Again, it's not that you can, they desire to have partners. So thank you very much.
And I'll also mention that there is in place for the cooperative research and development agreements that federal national labs can do with industry, they can do with universities. So I think that's absolutely right. There's some wonderful opportunities there that we should have.
And speaking of the ERIC Hub, the leader of the hub proposal, Ed Bogish.
I'm Ed Bogish from the Syracuse Center of Excellence. I just want to add two comments to Ed's outstanding presentation here, comments about what we did.
congratulations. I mean, you have the magnitude of what the Syracuse team led. You have to appreciate it. I think the final document was 1,900 pages in 87 days. You can imagine how many people, especially on my side, had to be corralled to cooperate. So that was an extraordinary march, regardless of the outcome. And I do hope, obviously, for a good outcome, but we know the competition is stiff. What Rensselaer was after, in addition, as Ed knows, in addition to the win, if we could get it, was to get the best possible assessment that we could of all the potential players in this space, number one. And number two, to have them develop focused content materials that can now be realigned, reassembled in other competitions. I agree with that. We don't have a complete state assessment, but it's a great, great start. I just want to congratulate Syracuse and thank you for your effort.
So as a sometimes patent attorney, I'm irrationally exuberant that you got us to agree on anything. The question for you, or maybe it's for Ted, is that's an achievement of the first order, and I'm sure that people would like to participate or observe or weigh in on what those sort of canonical licensing agreements or interrelationships, contractual interrelationships between universities and industry would be. Is there going to be comment on that? Is there a place where people can see what it is that you're doing or Columbia is doing and help back to it?
The interinstitutional agreements, I think that's the acronym. That is yet to be put in place, but we do have a very comprehensive, very well thought out intellectual property management plan. So I don't want to comment on that. But with Ed's guidance, what we have done early in the fall semester was put together two documents. One is what we call a licensing template agreement. And I say we, these are all my students. I just sort of sit back and say this is what we need to do. And what the students did, they looked at 25 or 30 different licensing agreements and then selected the ones that sort of showed some difference and created a document where in each licensing clause you had the choice of 3 or 4 different clauses. So that's a matter of record at this point. And we also have a licensing master agreement that we put together for NISTAR. So we should probably put those up on our webpage. But yes, other people have asked for that as well. So we are working on that.
So there's an interesting opportunity there, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about IP, but interinstitutional agreements, if you're thinking about what the task force has said about this idea of connecting universities and industry, there's a real opportunity to connect industry to multiple universities and to pool IP from different universities. This conversation I've had with people from the tech transfer, probably John and I have talked about this as well. Is that part of what, so when you say interinstitutional agreements, is that part of your purview? Is to try to figure out a way that universities can collaborate to pool their IP?
Oh, absolutely. So it actually was a bit more complicated than Ed suggested, because not only did we have a number of different universities that had to get on board with the same intellectual property management policy, we had 25, 30 major corporations, and we had to deal with them too. And so one of the threshold issues that we got to confront is we were asking the universities basically to nominate Columbia as the exclusive licensing agent, and sort of in a sense giving away their intellectual property. But we know that if we fund a subcontract with General Electric's not going to put their intellectual property out of that project in any sort of Columbia pool. So the dichotomy between what was expected by the corporations and what we had to get the university. So yes, that is all wrapped into this, and that was part of the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.